What's up, everybody? Today I'm going to be dishing out some tone tips. So tone is extremely subjective. So this is just my opinion on things. These are just things I've learned over the years of playing and performing and teaching guitar. Just thought I would share it for you, for your benefit. So yeah, think of your tone as a chain. The chain starts with the pick that you use. Then you strike the strings. The strings get picked up by the pickups, and it gets sent through a cable, through your effects, to your amp, goes through a bunch of stuff in your amp, and then it comes out a speaker. Might seem a little tedious, but every single one of those components impacts your sound. And so it's important to understand, at least on some level, how those components affect your tone. Now, if you don't have like professional level equipment, you probably have some equipment that maybe models some of this stuff. Like if you have a digital modeling amp. I have one for a practice amp. I know a really popular one right now is the Fender Mustang. There's also pedals that emulate amps like the Line 6 Helix, Strymon, Iridium, things like that. Those are all just, I know they're pedals, but they're all just trying to emulate this whole chain of things. So what I really want you to do is I want you to think in a sequence, okay? But before we get to all that stuff, like I said, tone is very subjective. So the first thing that I want you to do as you're figuring out what tone you want to have, or what tones you want to use, I should say, because it always depends on the situation, is I want you to start thinking about your favorite guitarists and the songs that you like, the tones that you like from whatever songs, and I want you to research their gear, because that's really where a lot of this stuff starts. You can learn how to play the music, and tone is for sure in the hands. Playing, having your hands on the strings, making the sounds, that's really where the mojo is. But I think a lot of the answerable questions here in this video are going to have to do with gear. So look up your favorite musician's gear. There's a great website that has gotten really popular over the years now called equipboard.com, and you can pretty much just look up any musician and see a list of gear that they've used on different recordings, different albums, and things like that. But it's always changing, so definitely don't think that they just stick with one thing and then forever are tied to it, because they're not. Another great resource for finding out about gear is just looking up live performances of your favorite musicians and just paying attention to what's on in the background. There's always going to be a guitar amp behind the guitar player. What is it? If there's a shot of the stage floor, can you see their pedal board? What kind of guitar are they playing? All important things. But let's go ahead and get back to this chain of tone. How about that? The tone chain. So it all starts with your pick. And I know that's probably maybe not the place that many of you expected for this to start, but it's true. Just ask any drummer, if their drumsticks change the tone of their playing. We're doing essentially the same action as a drummer does. We're using this tool to strike an object and produce a sound. So, the material that this tool is made of, how thick it is, how thin it is, all that affects the sound. It affects the amount of attack on the strings, how much treble there is in the tone. A first actionable step that you could take is just looking up the pick that your favorite guitar player uses. A lot of really popular guitar players have their own signature picks, and that's a nice way to test out their picks and see if they sound right for you, if they feel good for you. So yeah, picks are really important. I would say, honestly, just have a ton of different kinds of picks. I just have a drawer in an organizer by my desk, and it's filled with dozens of just different kinds of picks. I have picks made of metal, copper, I have picks made of wood, I have picks made of bone, believe it or not, and obviously Tortex, plastic. The materials are endless, basically, and they all produce a different sound. So let's go ahead and go on to the next thing in the chain, the strings. Kind of similar to your pick, you know, the thickness of the strings is going to affect the sound a lot. Always reference this back to your favorite musicians if you're still trying to figure out, you know, what all these things sound like. So, you know, maybe your favorite guitar player is Slash, for example. Figure out what gauge strings that Slash uses on his Les Pauls, you know. Does he play with 9s? Does he play with 10s? Does he play with 8s? It really blew my mind. Recently, I was doing a little bit of a tone chase with Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, and I found out that he used 8s on his guitars in the 70s with Led Zeppelin. So to me, that just, I can't even fathom playing 8s. They're so thin. But it does explain quite a bit about his sound and the way that he's able to bend strings live. That was always a mystery to me. He'd do these crazy high bends. But now I know. He used 8s. Still have yet to try 8s, but I did go down a gauge. I use 9s now, just as a result of that little bit of research. And then, you know, the next part of the strings thing is, you could say brand. I don't know if I have a huge opinion on brands, to be honest with you. But whether they're flat wound or round wound makes a really big difference. I would say most rock guitar players use round wound strings. Those are just the stock strings that come on every electric guitar. Most jazz players use flat wound strings, but every once in a while you see a crossover. And one of my favorite bands, the band Krungbin, Mark Spear, the lead guitar player in that band, he plays a Fender Stratocaster and plays very non-jazzy lines, I guess is what I would say, with flat wound strings. And I think that that's a huge part of his sound. So, you know, there really are no rules, but yeah, I would say rock, you know, usually uses round wound, jazz usually uses flat wound, and then you've got some wild cards in there that just don't fit any mold. Alright, so after the strings, we have basically just the rest of the guitar, right? So let's start with the pickups. So the type of pickups that your guitar has, you know, do you have a Stratocaster, a Tele, a Les Paul? Do you have a hollow body guitar, semi-hollow body? All these things make a huge impact. Do those guitars have single coil pickups? Do they have humbuckers? There's other kinds of pickups, Filtertrons, Jazzmaster pickups. There's a whole world of pickups, and they each have their own sound. So again, you know, think about your favorite musicians. So I'll use Slash again. So Slash plays a Les Paul. I know a Les Paul has humbuckers in it. So if I want to sound like Slash, I need to have a guitar that has humbuckers. At least if I'm trying to get as close to that as possible. You know, if I want to sound like Jimi Hendrix, I know Jimi Hendrix used a Stratocaster. Stratocasters mostly have single coil pickups, and especially the guitars that he played, they were only single coils. So that's how you get a similar tone. So yeah, the next thing is, you know, if you're going for a specific song, think about the specific pickup on the guitar that's selected. So is it really bassy? Is it thick sounding? It's probably just the neck pickup. Is it, you know, does it have an edge, or is it during a solo? A lot of rock guitar solos use the bridge pickup. You know, it also depends on the guitar too, because I also have a Jazzmaster, and my favorite pickup setting on the Jazzmaster, and I think for a lot of Jazzmaster players, is actually just the middle position where you have both pickups. Another famous musician that likes that middle position on Les Pauls is Peter Green from Fleetwood Mac. So just, pay attention to that. Again, look up live performances and figure out where this switch is at, what position is it in? And then see how that sounds on your guitar. The next part of the tone journey is going to be these knobs right here, your volume and tone knobs. Not too much to say about these. I don't think I need to explain what they do. They turn things up or down. They cut off the treble. But, I really think there's two major tips that I want to give you. And that is that people tend to leave these tone knobs alone. But, just turning them down a little bit, makes a huge impact on your sound if if it's necessary for the specific context that you're working within. I think Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, he said that he pretty much turns his tone knobs down on every song, and it explains a lot about his guitar tones. And I feel like that band is famous for their rock guitar tone specifically, and he's famous for being very particular about his guitar tone. So, if somebody like that is saying, I turned down the tone, you should experiment with it. Don't just leave it alone. And then one of the best tips I can give you as far as volume goes, the volume knobs, is a lot of people don't know this, but on most volume knobs, there's actually a treble boost between 8 and 10. So if you turn down your guitar to 7, it'll actually take off a little bit of the treble. And what I found is on certain types of pickups, like on humbuckers, for example, which have a higher output than other kinds of pickups, it really helps with clarity on chords. It helps you get a nice clean tone if you want that, and can really kind of tame your overdrive pedals or your overdriven amp in a way that just turning down the amp won't. Okay, so that's the guitar, and that's the pick and the strings. Huge parts of the sound. The next thing we have is the cable, which is often basically just completely written off as unimportant. I would say, there's not too much to say about cables, except don't get one that sucks. Just buy a good cable and don't lose it. You don't have to spend $50 on a cable. You can spend $20 on a cable or $15 on a cable, but don't spend $5 on one. And treat it well. Learn how to coil cables. They have a special way of being wrapped. I was going to do that motion with my hands for some reason, but I don't have a cable, so it makes no sense. But make sure that you know how to coil cables properly so that you can store them and that they'll last. Because if you treat cables well, then your tone will be unaffected as they go through them. And that's exactly their purpose. Okay, so we've got that. Now we have the pedals, guitar pedals and effects. I think I'm just going to stick with gain and distortion, overdrive, things like that, because there's too much other stuff. Maybe I'll talk about some other tone shaping pedals, but I think that'll be about it. The first thing that you can do, if you really want to be particular, is you can just get an EQ pedal. I actually have an EQ pedal. It's the Earthquaker Devices Tone Job. It's fantastic. I love it. It's just got 4 knobs. One of them's for volume, the other's treble, middle, and bass. And I think it does really well. The next kind of tone shaping pedal you can use is a compressor. There are lots of different kinds of compressors. Again, it just depends on the genre that you're trying to play or the guitarist that you're figuring out how to emulate. But find out if they use compression and where they put it in their chain of effects, and just get a really similar type pedal. One really, this will come in handy with the distortion part of this video as well, but one really handy thing you can do is just look up, the name of a pedal, so like if Slash uses some famous compressor pedal or whatever, and then just put the word clone after it. And that will give you a great introduction into that kind of effect. You can buy it for really cheap, and obviously the real deal is going to be better, but if you're just trying to figure out how things sound and if they work right for you, then maybe trying something out is the right way to go. There's nothing worse than spending a bunch of money on an effect, finding out that you don't like it, and then having to resell it at a loss. So sometimes it's best just to try things out first. Okay, so we covered EQ, compression. The next thing that we're going to go over is gain. Gain, overdrive, distortion, fuzz, all that stuff. I think kind of where it all starts with is probably just blues, because blues has typically like the lowest amount of gain, but still having gain. I'm thinking like Rolling Stones or 50s and 60s blues guitar players, B.B. King, Freddie King, Buddy Guy, players like that have a very small amount of gain. What I have done on my pedal board is I have 3 overdrive pedals. Some people think that's a lot. I don't know. But I basically have one that's like a small amount of gain, and then I have one that's a little bit more, and then I have one that's like a crazy amount of gain. So maybe I'll demonstrate some of that stuff for you. The main, as far as overdrive pedals go, there's kind of like a couple archetypes, I guess is what I would call them, that most pedals are trying to copy. The first one is the Ibanez Tubescreamer. Specifically, I think the TS-808 or the TS-9, either one of those, are going to be copied by other people quite a bit. So check those pedals out. There's the Boss Blues Driver, which is another low gain overdrive pedal. There's a pedal that basically no one owns but has been very influential called the Klon Centaur, and that's a very popular type sound. You can buy that today as a lot of people make that effect, but I think probably the most popular one is the EHX Soul Food. So give that a shot. Tubescreamer, Blues Driver, Centaur, and maybe like the full tone OCD, which has more gain on tap than the others, but is really, really popular among players. I would say those are probably the most popular, or like the kind of archetypical sounds that most pedals are trying to do a variation of at this point in the game. So, as far as getting a good tone out of those pedals, it's really just about your ear and comparing it against something. So what you want to do is pull up a song that you want to sound like, and again, this is just for finding your way. Obviously you can just turn stuff on and then play and figure it out that way too, and that's totally valid. But I like to kind of compare myself against a standard. So the way that I like to improve my ear and try and get tones that I wouldn't think of otherwise is I like to look up songs or solos or whatever, and then try and emulate that sound as closely as I can. And to me, what that does is it strengthens my ear, it makes me a better musician, brings me closer to the music that I love, so that when it comes time for me to be the artist and create my own sounds, I have all that experience and work and that ear working for me so that I can create sounds of my own. Distortion. So distortion is just basically overdrive but with more gain. I think there's some kind of distinguishment between them, But to be honest, I've never been very clear on it, and every time I look it up, it seems to just go one in one ear and out the other. So it can't be that important, to be honest. But yeah, distortion just emulates the sound of a really, really loud amp. Yeah, I don't know what to say that I haven't said with Overdrive already. Distortion is Overdrive, but more. How about that? Fuzz. Fuzz is, some archetypical distortions. That's what I should talk about. So like the kind of big distortion boxes. So the most famous one is probably just the Boss DS1. It's this orange pedal that is like $40 new. There's another one, I think it's MXR, the MXR Crunch Box. It's definitely called the Crunch Box. That one came out in the 80s. That was a really popular distortion for a long time. I think that's it. I mean, there's so many different ones now, it's hard to remember what kind of started it all. The main thing for distortion really was the amps. Because distortion like that didn't get popular until like the 80s, when people were using Marshall amps extremely loud, and I think people made those pedals so that they could get that Marshall amp sound, but at a quieter volume. And so people could, who were learning guitar could have that same tone. Alright, let's get to fuzzes, because they're one of my favorites. Fuzzes have a very unique sound. They are very different from overdrive and distortion, but I'll give you some effects that you can look up. So check out the Fuzzface, and then the Tonebender. That's the other one, the Vox Tonebender. Those are probably the two most popular fuzzes ever, and I would say most fuzzes are some kind of variant or response to those fuzzes, the Fuzzface and the Tonebender. So check those two out and see what you can get from that. Alright, so from there, if you want to talk about reverb, I think that's a decent thing to talk about. Basically, if you are trying to emulate the sound of a guitar amp, then you're just going to want to use a spring reverb. And the reason I bring this up is because everybody has a digital modeling amp now, and so you can choose all these different kinds of reverbs. But the main thing is you want a spring reverb if you want it to sound like a guitar amp. So use a spring reverb. But the other reason I wanted to bring this up is because there's a lot of hand-wringing about different kinds of reverbs and things that you should use. There's so many different reverb pedals on the market. But a lot of amps in the 70s and 80s, when these classic rock records that we're all emulating were made, a lot of amps didn't even have reverb on them. Marshall amps, no reverb. Orange amps, for the most part, no reverb. Fender amps had reverb on them, and so did, I think, Mesa Boogie. But, Marshall amps, no reverb, that's a lot of classic rock right there. So, don't think that reverb is this essential thing in your sound that you have to have, because it's not true. Cool. So that leaves us to, there's another cable. Remember that. There's another cable from your pedal to your amp. So get at least 2 good cables and treat them well. And then that leaves us at our amp. And this philosophy is the same, So look up your favorite musician's gear, figure out what amps they use, and if you have a practice amp or some kind of modeling amp, one thing that they do with those is they always make some kind of homage or reference to the thing that they're trying to copy. And I find that to be really useful because it's educational for you. Sometimes it's impossible to tell because it's just an amalgamation of letters and numbers. Like you might see like VX or maybe like AC30 2X12. And you're like, what the heck does that even mean? But then you come to find out that Vox makes an amp called an AC30 that has 2 12-inch speakers inside its cabinet, and now you're just probably so grateful that you can have a similar sound without having to pay $1,000. But yeah, there are certain things that amps are known for. You know, Fender amps are probably known best for having great clean tone. Marshall amps are known for having amazing rock sounds and metal sounds. Vox amps are known for being the amps that the Beatles used, also for having great clean tone. And then also I think Vox amps are known pretty well for being Brian May of Queen's amp of choice. So all those amazing lead guitar solos from Queen, those are played through Vox amps. Yeah, and a lot of this, you know, you just come to find out from going online and researching other musicians, but then also, you know, finding places like forums and things where people talk about gear, and, you know, places like Sweetwater and Musician's Friend and stuff like that, seeing what reviews people have to say about things. But I will say, you know, I wouldn't trust the reviews on gear sites like Sweetwater and stuff, not because they're disingenuous or anything, but because most of the time, those people aren't really, they're consumers is what they are. So they're not going to have the same perspective on the quality of gear as a professional might. So, like I said, you know, you always want to go back to the musicians, because what's actually being used by them, you know? There's a lot of things that are great for, you know, people who just want to play at home, but if you want to sound like Slash or somebody, you know, Slash isn't just going to play anything. He's going to play only the things that he thinks are best for his thing. So if you want to get a great head start on an awesome guitar tone, figure out what those things are and stick with them, you know? Or, you know, do what you can to sound as much like those components, you know, his pick, his strings, his guitar, his effects, and his amp. And yeah, you'll probably be really satisfied with the results. As far as settings on the amp go for, you know, different genres, I keep bringing this up, and I'm sorry if I'm being redundant, but really pay attention to when people are on stage. You can see amp settings, and you can copy them. Yeah, I just don't think I can give any kind of like knob settings, because every musician is going to have it different, and so everybody's settings are going to be different. And if I were to just say, turn your knobs to this for blues, or turn your knobs to this for rock, you know, it's probably not going to sound the way that you'd hoped. So maybe what I would say is, I'll give you a couple anecdotes, and they're not going to be, you know, final or anything like that, but maybe they'll help you out. Okay, so my camera turned off randomly, and I have a lesson in 4 minutes, so I'm going to try and wrap this thing up. Basically, yeah, I said Hendrix turned all his knobs up all the way. Try that. There's a lot of talk about mids in rock music, turning up the mids higher or giving them a little bit of a bump. If you have overdrive pedals, a lot of what they do is they boost the mids. But also in blues, like I've heard Stevie Ray Vaughan, he really likes to scoop the mids. So what that means is taking the mids out. I've also heard about scooping mids with metal guitar tones. But, you know, it depends on the band, depends on the setting, obviously. What I would just suggest you do is just try it all and just figure out how it sounds, you know, relative to your goals as a guitarist and as an artist. And, you know, you'll develop your own taste just based on those experiences, really. But yeah, you have to have those experiences to have an opinion. So yeah, hopefully this has been really helpful. Sorry we got interrupted there at the end, but yeah, hopefully this gets you started right on your tone journey. And let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. And yeah, thanks for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel.